Mitch Marner's story with the Toronto Maple Leafs began like a dream. The hometown kid, brimming with talent and enthusiasm, drafted by the team he grew up idolizing. For a time, he was the face of a promising new era, electrifying on the ice and beloved by many fans. But as years passed and playoff heartbreaks piled up, that love faded. Contract drama, underwhelming postseason performances, and the weight of expectations shifted public opinion. In the pressure cooker of Toronto hockey, every misstep was amplified, on sports talk shows, in headlines, and across social media. While many still saw him as a dedicated elite player, frustration and fatigue led a vocal segment of the fanbase to turn on him. His rise, his unraveling, and his eventual departure from the Leafs are not just the story of one player, but a reflection of a city's obsession, disappointment, and growing sense that time was running out. This is the story of Mitch Marner and the Toronto Maple Leafs. When Marner entered the NHL, he was a hometown hero in the making. Drafted 4th overall by Toronto in 2015, the kid from the Leafs' backyard quickly became a fan favorite with his enthusiasm and dazzling skills. By his second and third NHL seasons, Marner was the team's leading scorer, and in the fans' eyes, part of the young core, destined to finally bring a Stanley Cup to Toronto. That goodwill, however, was severely tested in the summer of 2019. Marner's entry-level contract expired in 2019, setting up a high-stakes negotiation for his next deal. What should have been a celebratory re-signing of a star turned into a protected contract standoff that dragged through the offseason. Marner and his agent drove a hard bargain with the Leafs GM, Kyle Dubas, reportedly seeking terms comparable to or even exceeding with teammate Austin Matthews. As weeks passed without a contract, fan sentiment started to change. The once beloved Marner was now accused by some of greed and disloyalty, putting himself above the team. The negotiations played out very publicly, with rumors that Marner's camp was entertaining options like playing overseas if Toronto didn't meet their price. By the time Marner finally signed a 6-year, $65.4 million contract on September 13, 2019, carrying a hefty $10.9 million annual cap hit, significant damage had been done to his image. Many fans were left with a bitter taste. In their view, Marner's lengthy holdout, coming after a 94-point season, felt like a betrayal of the hometown discount that they had hoped for. The media narrative didn't help either. Talk radios and articles complained about Marner's camp playing hardball and potentially entertaining offer sheets from rival teams. It became ugly and personal. As one analyst noted, that 2019 offseason turned Marner into a polarizing player. His agent's aggressive tactics and the public posturing soured him with many fans who had previously adored him. However, once the contract saga was over, Marner continued to shine in the regular season. In fact, by 2022, he was being hailed as one of the top wingers in the NHL, named to the league's first All-Star team. Year after year, Marner filled the stat sheet. 90-plus point seasons, highlight reel assists, franchise records, including a 23-game point streak in 2022. By 2025, he even hit a career high, 102 points, in a season. He became the 5th highest point scorer in Maple Leafs history, with 741 career points in Toronto. An impressive resume for someone still in his 20s. On paper, Marner's regular season put him among the Leafs' greats, but despite all those points, fans saw one big problem. He didn't show up in the playoffs. The Maple Leafs as a team repeatedly fell short in the postseason, and Marner's individual output seemed to shrink when it mattered the most. The contrast became a sticking point. During the regular season, Marner was magic, but in the playoffs, he and the team could not get over the hump. Toronto endured one painful elimination after another, often in winner-take-all games, and Marner's stat lines in those games drew anger among the fans. In 7 career do-or-die playoff games, Game 7s or deciding Game 5s in shortened series, Marner scored 0 goals and just 2 assists, with the Leafs losing every one of those games. The narrative emerged that Marner, for all his talent, wasn't a clutch player who could elevate his game in the postseason's heavy atmosphere. Fans and media hung on every missed opportunity. For instance, in the 2021 first round against Montreal and the 2023 second round against Florida, Marner went for long stretches without finding the back of the net. And overall, in 70 career playoff games with Toronto, Marner managed 13 goals, a decent total, but nowhere near his regular season scoring rate, and most importantly, the amount that would excuse his paycheck. And those goals tended to come early in the series, but when elimination loomed, he, like the team, went quiet. The criticisms that he disappears in the playoffs grew louder each spring. Some questioned Marner's toughness and willingness to battle through the tight checking of playoff hockey. He's too much on the perimeter, they complained, too hesitant to shoot. One fan-driven analysis bitterly pointed out that Marner lacks grit needed in the postseason's physical environment. In truth, Marner wasn't the only Leaf who struggled. The entire team underperformed in playoffs year after year. But being a top-paid star put the target on his back. His stellar regular season resume almost worked against him in that regard. The better he did from October to April, the more glaring the drop-off seemed come by May. By 2023, even as he had just helped Leafs finally win a playoff round, their first series win since 2004, fan sentiment remained unmoved. They pointed to his lack of goals in the next round and the ultimate failure to advance. The phrase regular season player began to circulate, suggesting that Marner's numbers were hollow when it came to championship aspirations. Every time Toronto fell out early, Marner's playoff stat line was scrutinized and the frustration snowballed. Marner's deal, worth $10.9 million per year, ranked as the second highest cap hit of any winger in the NHL at the time, to many fans seemed exuberant. They couldn't help but compare Marner's salary to those of the other elite wingers who had proven more in the playoffs or won Stanley Cups. For instance, Marner was out-earning Stanley Cup champions and MVP caliber players like Nikita Kucherov, David Pastrnak, Mikko Rantanen, and Matthew Tkachuk, all whom carried lower cap hits than Marner during those years. Was Marner really more valuable than those superstars? The contract painted Marner as overpaid for his position in the minds of fans, a luxury the Leafs couldn't quite afford amid their cup aspirations. Worse still, Toronto had already committed massive cap space for its core four: Matthews, Tavares, Nylander, and Marner. Out of the group, Marner had the second highest salary, about $4 million more than Nylander, despite similar production. Fans saw Nylander as a bargain, and Marner as a burden. Every early playoff exit reignited debate over cap allocation, with Marner's deal blamed for the team's lack of depth. As the years passed without playoff glory, the Leafs faced a crossroad in 2025. Marner's big contract, and those of fellow core players, was nearing its end, and Toronto had to decide whether to recommit long-term or change course. By this point, we already know all the rumors that were swirling around, that Marner would seek yet another massive payday, perhaps even wanting to be the highest paid player on that team. Some reports suggested that Marner could be asking around $14 million per season on the open market if he got there, given his rising salary cap and his status as an elite point producer. That figure, $14 million, became something of a rallying cry among frustrated fans, who saw it as an almost absurd thing to ask. To them, it echoed the 2019 saga all over again. Marner and his camp appearing to prioritize top-of-market money even after years where team results hadn't met expectations. In truth, whether Marner literally demanded 14 M's or not, we don't really know. We do know he was in line for a huge contract, but by June of that year, the writing on the wall was that Marner was likely not to return to Toronto. Insiders reported that Marner's camp hadn't engaged in extension talks and that the players seemed headed to market on July 1st. Rather than lose their asset for nothing, the Maple Leafs pursued a sign and trade, a kind of rare maneuver in the NHL, but one that made sense here. Essentially, Toronto would sign Marner to the kind of lucrative long-term deal he wanted, then immediately trade him to another team, thereby netting the Leafs some return and giving the acquiring team the benefit of an extra year on the contract. Only Toronto as his current team could sign an 8-year deal. And that's exactly what happened on June 30th, 2025, when news broke that Marner was being dealt to the Vegas Golden Knights in a blockbuster sign and trade. Toronto inked him to an 8-year pact and shipped him to Vegas in exchange for a package highlighted by forward Nicolas Roy. Marner's new deal with Vegas came in at $96 million over 8 years, a $12 million annual cap hit. It wasn't quite the $14 million per year, but it instantly tied Marner as the 5th highest paid player in the NHL, and the Golden Knights were willing to pay that price. For Toronto, the Marner era ended not with a parade, but with a parting. The sign and trade decision was met with mixed reactions from fans, a lot of shock and sadness, but also a measure of relief among those who had grown tired of the drama. On one hand, Marner was a Toronto-born superstar who had given the team 9 excellent seasons. On the other hand, his departure symbolized an opportunity for the franchise to retool a different way. Toronto simply couldn't justify another huge raise on a player who had become, in effect, a lightning rod. And from Marner's perspective, the fresh start in Vegas, far from the Toronto spotlight, might have been welcome. Toronto gets some assets, Vegas gets their star winger under contract, and Leafs fans get to close a difficult chapter. The relationship with Marner and fans was difficult to say the least. The pressurized media environment in Toronto is difficult for some to handle. Playing for the Maple Leafs is like living under a microscope. The market is often described as a fishbowl, where every move, on or off the ice, is scrutinized. Marner, being a star local player, found himself at the center of the storm from day one. Toronto sports media is relentless. Countless of reporters at every practice, talk shows breaking down the team 24/7, and newspapers and articles ready to list every quote from any player. For a young player, this can be overwhelming, and Marner's words and actions frequently got blown out of proportion or spun into storylines that fueled fan reactions. Consider an example. In May 2023, with the Leafs down 0-3 in a playoff series against Florida and facing elimination, Marner answered a question to a reporter and said, "We don't care what you guys say. We don't listen to you guys outside of this locker room." It was an emotional remark from a player under fire, essentially trying to shut out the external noise. But of course, that became an instant headline. The quote was splashed across sports sites and discussed everywhere. Was Marner showing frustration? Was he dismissing the fans as well? He said "you guys" to the media, and some took it as anyone outside the team, kinda just playing with his words. In the Toronto media fishbowl, this minor outburst fed a narrative that Marner was feeling the pressure and snapping back. Every losing streak, every power play slump would bring renewed media focus on Marner's demeanor, his confidence, even his off-ice lifestyle, all fair game for debate in the papers and on TV. And in such an environment, small things can become big very quickly. If you just look at X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, and you look at the comment sections and the general Toronto Twitter, you would see hashtags like Trade Marner and fans trolling and flooding the online space with reactions. Some are rational, but many are not. At times, the online abuse crossed the line into personal attacks. Things got so heated that by 2024, there were reports that Marner took steps to shield himself. According to one Toronto columnist, Marner and his agency even hired private security personnel to act as buffers with the media, an almost unheard of move, suggesting how uncomfortable he had become with the constant scrutiny. But in all honesty, it wasn't just Marner. The Leafs have endured almost 2 decades of playoff flops and over half a century without a Stanley Cup. The frustration in Toronto wasn't just about one player or 1 year. It was just cumulative agony of high hopes and heartbreaks. Every spring seemed to write a new chapter in the same sad story. By the time Marner was a few years into his career, the Leafs had lost 6 straight playoff series in which they had the chance to eliminate the opponent. In 2023, as I previously mentioned, they finally won a round, only to be bounced in the next. In that kind of environment, fans will always look for someone to blame, and in this case, it was Marner. Obviously others in the team as well, but it was more Marner. And his camp as well, his camp played a big role as well. In the end, Mitch Marner's time with the Toronto Maple Leafs was never just black and white. It was a story of souring highs and painful lows. Of a hometown hero, burdened by the very love that once lifted him. He was one of the most talented players to ever wear the Leafs jersey, and yet, many still grew to hate him. Some will always remember the contract drama, the playoff droughts, and the weight of unmet expectations. Others will remember the kid who lit up on the regular season, gave back to the community, and wore his heart on his sleeve every night. He wasn't perfect, but he cared, and in a city like Toronto, that made things complicated. Now that the chapter has closed, the debates will slowly fade, but the legacy remains. Mitch Marner didn't bring a Stanley Cup to Toronto, and his time was controversial. One thing's certain, Marner was never just another player in Toronto. Whether you praised him or blamed him, Mitch Marner left his mark.